I think that firms have a real opportunity to leverage the core strengths that women have as female advisors, and I sort of call this relationship equity, the power to connect, the power to collaborate, and ultimately the power to build trust equity, those deeper, more meaningful connections. I think one of the fundamental issues that we have in this profession, although it is evolving, is that we are still largely stuck in that sort of traditional sales culture. And that has a lot of impact on women in wealth management. When it comes to building deeper, more connected relationships, we tend to get in the, right, as firms deal with growth and capacity, the idea that we want more client relationships. And I think female advisors are really able to sit in a seat where they're really uniquely able to make the point that more isn't better, better is better, right? How do we create systems and structures and leverage people, process, and platforms to a higher level so that not just female advisors, but all advisors can really tap into the potential that they have to build trust equity, which is the real value that we have in client relationships. I think one of the biggest reasons that women aren't advancing more in the industry or we're not leveraging their strengths and talents is because we are, to an extent, still in a sales or a product culture. If you think about just sort of the overall evolution of the profession, right, in the 70s and the 80s, it was about product. Then it evolved to investment process, right? Then it evolved to planning. And now there is a very marked shift towards what I call sort of the co-creator or the partner model. A lot of the research that we did at United Capital back in the day showed, right, people are more invested in own decisions when they co-create them. They don't want, right, a patriarch writing a prescription. They want to co-create that plan and own it. And women have a unique ability to connect, to collaborate, to create space for the behavioral questions that are really where the profession is leaning. But that really is sort of the tip of the spear. The overall body of the profession is still largely stuck in that, sales or investment mode. And I think women start to think of this profession as investment banking or now bubble baths. And I think we want this space in the middle where it can be a true profession and we have the ability to advance women and men based on their ability to bring those talents and skill sets, which is where the real value proposition is. I think the idea of how do we foster more inclusive leadership and innovation for women in wealth management has to, one, recognize that progress has been made, which is fantastic. But I think the constant conversation that there's so much more that we can, should, and need to do, not just from a male-female perspective, but from a growth of the space perspective. 70% of the people that join this space, in particular advisors, drop out in the first 5 years. Male or female, it's a higher percentage for females. So whether it's being an advisor, being in service, operations, or marketing, it's how do we foster just as a space and a profession where we can hire, train, mentor, develop, and grow talent in a way that really works. For women in general, it goes back to that issue of we're still largely rooted in a sales culture. Our organizational models typically tend to reward rainmakers and revenue drivers and the loudest people in the room. Those often aren't the women, at least not to start. And because we don't have structures, there's a difference between mentoring and developing and hiring. So having true structures where we can really tap women and people of talent to really move them through in a structured and organized way is one of the things that we can do. I just happen to know from 30 years of consulting that training and development is almost always the very last thing on the list for firms. It doesn't become the highest priority until scaling advisor growth really kicks in. The other fundamental breakdown that we have is career paths and compensation structures reward rainmaking and revenue drivers. They don't actually reward deep, meaningful, connected relationships. And very often, they don't even reward share of wallet, referrals, or partnership relationships that drive growth of the client base. So if we're not culturally aligned with the capability set of our talent team, we're going to lose half that talent team, and the data says that we are.